Now, throughout these prepping lessons, we've been talking a lot about dividing the character up into different pieces, so we have lots of different jointed parts, and that's certainly an important part of rigging. But once we get into the rigging process, you'll see that we actually have a number of options for rigging limbs and other parts of the body, and in some cases we do want separated pieces. In other cases we're going to want pieces joined together, and we're going to use the puppet tool to bend those pieces rather than actually having separate layers that joint and pivot off of one another. This will all make more sense once we get a little deeper into the rigging process. It's often a good idea when prepping, if you're not sure how you're going to rig something, to go ahead and separate more layers rather than less, because you can always pre-compose layers together to rejoin them if you need to in After Effects. So if you're kind of unsure of how a rig is going to go together, erring on the side of more separated layers rather than less is a pretty good policy. Once you get more experience with rigging and you have a better idea of how each rig is going to go, you may not have to do that in every case, but it's a good kind of general rule of thumb, because it's easier to join layers together in After Effects than to split them apart. In those cases, you'll probably want to go back to Photoshop or Illustrator and re-separate the layers and re-import them and so on, which can be kind of a pain. But given that pre-composing layers together in After Effects is a pretty common practice in rigging, and certainly there's certain elements, like for example the face and the head, where you're almost in every case going to pre-compose all the facial feature elements along with the head elements all into one pre-comp on almost every rig you make. And aside from that, you'll often find yourself making decisions like, oh, well, I separated the upper and lower arm, but now that I'm in here working on the rig, I realize that I actually want to puppet tool this arm, and I don't want to use the separated pieces, so I need to pre-compose them together. This kind of thing happens a lot. So I'm going to show you a great procedure for doing this kind of pre-comping that allows you to pre-compose elements, crop them, and then realign them very efficiently. We'll probably touch on this again during the rigging lessons, but I wanted to cover it now because it's something that comes up pretty often. So let's say, for example, that we've got this character here, and we have separated all of these arm parts. We've got even individual fingers and separate hand piece and all these different pieces. But let's say that we decided that, hey, we're actually going to puppet tool this arm along with the hand. We're just going to puppet tool this whole thing. So we need to combine all of these layers together into a pre-comp. Now you may be saying to yourself, well, I know how to pre-comp. Pre-comping is easy. It's kind of basic After Effects. But there's a couple specific issues in regards to rigging that we want to consider when we're pre-comping, and that's where these little tricks that I'm going to teach you are going to come in really handy. So to start with, we're going to make a duplicate of one of the layers we're going to pre-comp. So we're going to pre-comp all these together, but we're going to make a duplicate of the upper arm. And we don't have to duplicate all the layers, we just need one to use as a guide. But it's a good idea to try to choose a layer that has some detail in it. And in this case, the upper arm has this nice plaid texture. So I'm going to go ahead and duplicate that layer, and I'm going to drop that on top of the other layers, and I'm just going to name it _guide just to keep track of what I'm doing here. And then I'm going to toggle my switches and modes here, and I'm going to choose a difference blend mode. And with a layer on top of its identical layer, the difference blend mode will turn the whole thing black. Now you'll see why we're doing this in just a minute, so just hang with me here and it will all make sense. Now I'm going to go ahead and lock this layer as well, this guide layer. All right, now we're going to go ahead and do our pre-comp. So we're going to select all of the layers in this arm, and we will do the usual thing of using either the pull-down menu or Shift-Command-C to pre-compose. We're going to name this appropriately, left arm, because it's now the entire arm rather than separate pieces. And in this case, let's go ahead and keep Open New Composition checked, okay? So let's go ahead and Click OK, and now we have this pre-composition with just the arm. Now again, you might be saying, well, duh, I know how to pre-comp. I've done it a million times. But here's the thing. This pre-comp is 6,000 pixels by 6,000 pixels because that's the size of our original rig comp. And if we were to use this pre-comp, it would be pretty inefficient because we'd then be moving around and rigging this whole big giant composition when we really don't need to. We really only need this little piece of artwork right here. So what we want to do is we want to crop this. Some people know this trick and some people don't, but there is actually a cropping tool in After Effects. It's just not called the cropping tool. It's the region of interest tool. And you may or may not know region of interest, but region of interest is designed to isolate small areas of the composition window so that After Effects only renders that small area. It allows you, especially if you're dealing with a big project with some difficult RAM previewing and rendering, that you can just isolate a small part if you just need to check one little thing. And when you run your RAM preview, it'll just RAM preview that one little box, okay? But it can also work as a cropping tool, which not everybody realizes or knows. So we're going to go ahead and grab the region of interest tool, and I'm going to click and drag my little region of interest box around my arm. Now this will now work much like a cropping tool where it's just a box, an editable bounding box that I can now push and pull on. I want to make it fairly snug around the arm artwork. It doesn't have to be like right on top because, hey, maybe I want to come in here and add some different hands or add a hand with something, it holding something or something like that. If I wanted to do that, I need to kind of think ahead and make sure I allow enough room for that. In this case, we can be pretty snug around this arm, because we just need this isolated arm here. And right now we're just using this as the region of interest, so it's just merely only rendering in this area. It's just not rendering the rest of this area. But we can now take the extra step and actually crop the composition to this new size. And that's up here under Composition, where you'll see Crop Comp to Region of Interest. And if we go ahead and select that, it now crops this composition down to that, and now we have a nice, small, neat little composition, which is awesome. Very efficient for RAM previews and rendering and all that kind of stuff. However, and you may have already seen ahead to this, it's caused us a new issue, which is if we go back to our original rig comp, the arm is no longer in place. It's now centered itself because it's a little small composition, and it's automatically centered. So now it's sitting over the top of her body in a way that obviously is not helpful. But this is where our guide comes in. So I'm going to go ahead and just solo these two layers here real quick. And in this particular case, I'm going to leave the black background. I could, turn it off with the transparency grid, but in this case, the black background will be kind of handy. And now we can use this guide to realign these layers, and because we're using the difference blend mode, we basically just have to get these layers on top of one another until the detail goes totally black. I guess we're not going to get it perfectly black up at the top. I guess we've got some anti-aliasing there, but we've got everything else black. Let's zoom in just a little bit here. I've got a little bit of detail there. Let's see if we can get rid of that. There we go. Okay, so by using the nudge keys, I nudge until this is entirely black when it's all zoomed in. And now I know that I've got this arm aligned exactly to the pixel where it should be. Now I can go ahead and delete my guide layer and re-color code my arm here. And I'm all set to go with my pre-composed arm that's now one layer, and I haven't lost any of its alignment. It's positioned exactly where it should be. Last thing I'm going to do here is just drag this pre-comp into my comps folder just to clean up my project window. Now this is a great little trick that you can actually use in a lot of situations in After Effects. And when you're working on your own characters, you can use this technique to create any kind of configuration for your rigging that you need.